event and they get on really well with it. For me, it wasn't that kind of experience. I hadn't expected the press.
What if everything we were told about Archie's royal birth was a lie? On live national television, opera star Wynne stunned the UK with a jaw-dropping revelation during an interview on ITV's This Morning. He claimed a former palace aide told him in no uncertain terms Meghan Markle was never pregnant with Archie. Instead, the birth was the result of a secret surrogate arrangement that, according to The Insider, everyone close to the Sussexes knew about. The aide allegedly described it as a modern choice, but one cloaked in royal tradition to avoid backlash and constitutional questions. This wasn't whispered gossip or online speculation. It was a bold claim delivered straight to millions of viewers, and it's igniting a media firestorm. Why would such a high-level secret be kept from the public? What does this mean for the monarchy and for the legitimacy of Archie's place in the royal line? Tonight, we unravel the interviews, dissect the timeline, and hear from insiders who say this shocking revelation may only be the beginning. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The soft lights of the ITV This Morning studio flickered against the polished backdrop as host Dermot O'Leary leaned into his next question. Wynne Evans, best known for his operatic baritone and familiar face in British households, shifted slightly in his seat. What came next would not be forgotten. There are moments in live television where something slips through the cracks, a comment, a confession, a passing anecdote that has the power to detonate a media firestorm. This was one of those moments. In the space of less than a minute, Wynne uttered a sentence that shattered a tightly controlled royal narrative. A former palace aide once told me directly, it wasn't a traditional birth. There was a surrogate. Everyone close to the Sussexes knew. It just wasn't supposed to get out. The silence in the studio was deafening. The hosts, usually quick to respond, stumbled briefly. Was this a joke? A mistake? Or had a long-suspected rumor just been confirmed on national television? Before anyone could redirect or retract, the clip was already on Twitter. Within minutes, it had been sliced, captioned, and shared by every royal watching account in the English-speaking world. Hashtags began trending. Hashtag SurrogateGate. Hashtag WynneBombshell. Hashtag Meghan and Archie. For some, it confirmed what they'd quietly believed for years but were too afraid to say out loud. For others, it was seen as an outrageous smear. But whether one believed it or not, no one could ignore it. To understand the weight of Wynne's comment, one must appreciate the sacred choreography surrounding royal births. Since time immemorial, royal family members, particularly women, have adhered to an almost theatrical performance of childbirth. The staged photos on the hospital steps, the smiling waves, the tightly wrapped infant in the arms of a glowing mother. These moments are more than tradition. They are carefully constructed images, imbued with political significance and social messaging. The public isn't just seeing a baby, they're witnessing the continuation of the monarchy's legitimacy. So when Meghan Markle, the American actress turned Duchess of Sussex, broke from these customs during her pregnancy with Archie, it raised eyebrows. The couple refused to name the hospital. There was no media presence at the birth. In fact, by the time the press learned of Archie's arrival, he had already been born, and the family had retreated into private quarters. The announcement came after the fact, vague and curated. No photo op outside a maternity wing, no visible royal physician, and no concrete proof of labor. To critics, it was an unthinkable break from protocol. To supporters, it was a long-overdue assertion of privacy in a media-obsessed culture. Yet beneath this surface-level departure from tradition, murmurs persisted. They whispered in tabloids and online forums. They lingered in the corners of YouTube, buried in comment sections and pieced together video montages. There were clips of Meghan's baby bump appearing to collapse inward when she squatted. There were sequences where the size of her bump seemed to change dramatically between days, sometimes within hours. A body language expert claimed her gait didn't match that of a heavily pregnant woman. Speculation intensified when Meghan's maternity outfits were analyzed frame by frame, leading some to wonder if she was using padding or prosthetics. Of course, these claims were dismissed by mainstream outlets as conspiracy theories, dismissed with the same disdain reserved for flat earthers or moon landing deniers. And perhaps they would have remained that way, forever relegated to internet folklore, if not for what happened on that quiet weekday morning on ITV. When Evans wasn't a royal correspondent. He wasn't a tabloid columnist. He wasn't even a political commentator. That was what made the moment so striking. He was, in many ways, an outsider. But that is also what gave his comment a certain unfiltered authenticity. He had no agenda, no book to promote, no vendetta against the Sussexes. He simply said what he had heard, and that raw honesty cut deeper than any formal exposé. What makes his claim even more astonishing is the source he cites, a former palace aide. Someone who had served within the walls of royal privilege. Someone who allegedly witnessed the closed-door decisions and unspoken agreements that never made it to press. According to Wynne, this aide described Meghan's use of a surrogate as a modern choice, not a scandalous one. A medical decision made with intent, but hidden behind the facade of tradition. Not because it was shameful, but because it was potentially destabilizing. This brings us to a deeper question. Why would such a choice be seen as controversial? In 2025, surrogacy is a medically sound and increasingly common option for families across the world. Celebrities, politicians, and everyday people use it for a wide range of reasons, from fertility struggles to health complications to personal preference. But in the monarchy, where every element of reproduction ties back to issues of bloodline, legitimacy, and succession, surrogacy becomes more than just a personal decision. It becomes a constitutional consideration. The line of succession is a legal document, not just a family tree. In theory, any hint that a royal child was not of the body of a royal mother could have implications for that child's position in the line. Even if those concerns are outdated or irrelevant in modern society, the crown operates on tradition, not trends. And in Meghan's case, any deviation from that script, especially one as explosive as surrogacy, would have been viewed not just as controversial, but as potentially destabilizing. If Wynne's claim is true, it may explain the immense secrecy surrounding Archie's birth. It may explain why there were no medical officials offering postnatal press briefings, no footage of Meghan entering or leaving the hospital, no official documentation immediately available. It may also explain why Prince Harry seemed unusually defensive in subsequent interviews, bristling at even mild questions about the pregnancy or their new life with Archie. It's possible they weren't just guarding their privacy. They were guarding a secret too big to explain away. Of course, some will argue that when Evans was misinformed, or that the aide he cites was exaggerating or flat out lying. But the fact that this story is resurfacing years after Archie's birth, and that it continues to ignite public interest, speaks volumes about the unresolved tension around Meghan's time in the royal family. Wynne didn't name the aide. He didn't provide dates or documents. But he didn't need to. The power of his statement was in its delivery. A calm, unscripted remark from someone outside the usual circles, echoing a rumor so persistent and so dangerous that it once seemed unthinkable to air on daytime TV. In the hours that followed his appearance, ITV reportedly received hundreds of emails demanding clarification. Social media exploded with side-by-side comparisons of Meghan's pregnancy photos. Some called it slander. Others called it vindication. Commentators on both sides of the Atlantic weighed in, many walking the tightrope between royal loyalty and investigative curiosity. Meanwhile, neither Meghan nor Harry made any public response. Not a denial. Not a clarification. Not a lawsuit. And that silence was deafening. Now, the world wants answers. Who was this palace aide? Why did they say what they said? Is there more evidence to come? And most critically, was the British public misled? In the chapters that follow, we will examine the interview in greater depth, dissect Meghan's pregnancy timeline, revisit the public's reaction, and hear from experts on royal protocol, surrogacy ethics, and media manipulation. We'll also explore the psychological toll of such a secret, if it existed, on a family that is already under siege from both public scrutiny and private pain. This story is not about shaming modern motherhood or vilifying medical choices. It's about transparency, truth, and the growing disconnect between what the royals show the world and what might actually be happening behind the curtain. Because when the most photographed family on Earth hides something this big, we have to ask, what else are we not seeing? The answers may shock you. The studio floor of ITV's This Morning was characteristically lively that Thursday morning, with laughter bouncing off the pastel-colored set walls and the smell of coffee drifting from behind the scenes. It was a normal broadcast. Or, at least, it began as one. When Evans, the charismatic opera singer turned television personality, was a scheduled guest. He was there for a light-hearted segment. The tone was meant to be casual, a brief break from heavier news cycles. The discussion was supposed to hover around opera, his public image, and maybe a little light gossip about British pop culture. But somewhere during the tail end of the conversation, something shifted. A question, perhaps innocent, perhaps rehearsed, redirected the conversation toward the royal family. The presenters, seemingly probing for a cheeky anecdote or casual opinion, didn't expect the response they received. The moment was subtle, so quiet in its impact that even those in the control room reportedly took a few seconds to register what had just happened. I once had a conversation with someone who worked closely with the royals. When began, his voice still calm, his eyes focused on the host. They told me flat out, there was a surrogate. It was never meant to get out, but everyone close to the Sussexes knew. The room seemed to inhale and hold its breath. Silence blanketed the segment. You could hear the rustle of the notes in the host's hand. He blinked twice, then stammered a transition. Oh, really? It was too late to retract the statement. It had been broadcast live to millions. Wynne didn't backpedal. He didn't smile like someone who had misspoken. He didn't look like a man spinning a rumor. He looked serious. The tone had shifted not just on set, but across the entire internet. What followed was immediate and uncontainable. Within minutes, social media users clipped the footage. Some overlaid the quote with shocking visuals, clips from Meghan Markle's public appearances during her pregnancy, images of her walking with varying bump sizes, moments where the public had long claimed something felt off. TikTokers added dramatic background music, added bold text to the bottom of the screen, and reposted it across platforms. Within 1 hour, the video had amassed hundreds of thousands of views. Within 4 hours, over 1 million. When Evans was trending worldwide, news outlets couldn't ignore it. Even those who historically avoided sensational royal gossip were forced to report the statement simply because of the impact it was making. Opera singer drops royal bombshell on morning TV, read one headline. Another was more direct. When Evans says Meghan used surrogate for Archie, claims former palace aide told him. This wasn't just another rumor being recycled on a conspiracy podcast. This was a respected public figure on national television, repeating something he had allegedly heard directly from a former palace insider. There was no laughter in his tone, no smirk, no pretense of sarcasm or storytelling, just an unfiltered, unguarded moment of truth, or what he believed to be truth. In the hours that followed, ITV's public relations team scrambled. According to a staffer who spoke to a UK-based entertainment columnist off-record, the producers behind This Morning were visibly distressed following the episode. Not because they believed Wynne had made a false statement, but because of the magnitude of what had been said and the lack of immediate editorial control. Once it aired live, there was no going back. As newsrooms across London clipped and analyzed the footage, attention turned toward the wording. There was a surrogate. Not, I think, or I heard someone say, or some people believe. Wynne's choice of words was not speculative, it was declarative. He was quoting someone he referred to as a palace aide, and while he did not name them, he appeared certain of the claim's legitimacy. Public reaction, as expected, was divided down deeply entrenched lines. Supporters of the royal family, particularly defenders of Meghan and Harry, lashed out instantly. They called Wynne's claim baseless, cruel, and steeped in the same toxic gossip that had plagued Meghan since her entrance into the royal scene. Several commentators labeled it modern-day witch hunting and accused the media of using Meghan's motherhood as a political target. On the other side, critics of Meghan erupted with vindication. For years, they had analyzed footage, gathered testimonies, speculated about inconsistencies. To them, Wynne's statement was not a revelation but a confirmation. Forums and social media accounts dedicated to royal commentary pulled up archived footage from 2019, particularly moments where Meghan's bump appeared to shift or behave in unnatural ways. One clip that resurfaced involved Meghan standing up from a seated position during a public engagement. As she moved, the curvature of her belly appeared to collapse inward momentarily. At the time, it was dismissed as camera distortion or dress movement. Now, with Wynne's quote circulating, it was reevaluated through a different lens. As media attention intensified, calls were made to ITV. Would Wynne Evans be reprimanded? Would This Morning issue a retraction? The network issued a vague statement through a spokesperson that afternoon. ITV does not endorse or confirm the opinions of its guests. The views expressed during live broadcasts remain those of the individuals involved. It was a standard line, but one that did little to quiet the uproar. The key question that took root in the public mind was simple. Why would Wynne Evans make this up? He had nothing to gain from the statement. In fact, if anything, he stood to lose his credibility and potentially suffer backlash from one of the most loyal and vocal fan bases in the world, the Sussex supporters. This fact alone lent an eerie credibility to the moment. It didn't feel like a clout-chasing soundbite. It felt like an accidental leak, a glimpse into the kind of off-record conversations that happen behind closed palace doors but are never supposed to surface. As speculation mounted, journalists began to dig. Who was the former palace aide? Was it someone connected to Buckingham Palace? Or one of the Sussex's own staff during their time at Frogmore Cottage? While Wynne didn't name names, royal insiders began making educated guesses. Several aides from Meghan and Harry's early team had quietly resigned or been reassigned in the months following Archie's birth. Some cited burnout. Others simply vanished from royal records without clear explanation. Could one of them have been the source? One former royal reporter told an online outlet that many of Meghan's staff during that period felt extremely constrained. According to them, communication with outside parties was monitored and press access was tightly restricted. This level of secrecy was explained as a desire for privacy, but in hindsight, some now wondered whether it was designed to hide something deeper. In the days following the interview, Wynne himself made no effort to retract or clarify his statement. In fact, when approached by paparazzi outside a theater in Cardiff, he reportedly smiled and said only, "I said what I heard." When asked if he regretted saying it on live TV, he allegedly replied, "Why should I? We're all grown-ups. We can handle the truth." That brief quote, "We can handle the truth," became a lightning rod online. Supporters of Wynne adopted it as a rallying cry, using it as a hashtag. Dozens of influencers began uploading videos dissecting not just the ITV segment, but the entirety of Meghan's pregnancy journey. Some turned the topic into hour-long podcasts. Others invited former palace observers to discuss the implications of a potential surrogate birth. Comment sections exploded with questions. Is this why they left the royal family? Could this be connected to the Queen's reported discomfort? Was Harry protecting Meghan, or was he part of the plan? By the end of the week, the British media landscape had transformed. What began as a casual guest appearance had evolved into a full-blown royal scandal revival. Theories that had once been dismissed as fringe now occupied mainstream headlines. The palace declined to comment. So did Meghan and Harry's spokesperson. The silence on all sides created a vacuum, and in that vacuum, speculation thrived. But the most chilling part of it all wasn't what Wynne said. It was how believable it sounded. If a surrogate had been used, and this fact deliberately concealed, what else had been hidden from the public? Was this an isolated incident, or was it part of a larger pattern of controlling narratives and manipulating image? And if the public had been lied to about something so foundational as a royal birth, what did that say about the current state of trust between the monarchy and its people? These questions remained unanswered. But one thing was clear: Wynne Evans had opened a door that would not be easily closed. As the public digested Wynne Evans' bombshell statement, attention naturally turned toward the source of his claim, the anonymous former palace aide. The power of that confession. There was a surrogate. It was never meant to get out, but everyone close to the Sussexes knew. Lay not just in its content, but in its credibility. This wasn't a quote lifted from an online rumor mill or whispered by a fringe blogger. According to Wynne, it came from someone who had served close to the core, someone familiar with the internal machinery of the royal household. That immediately changed the stakes. The British royal family is renowned for operating behind layers of discretion. Every announcement, every public appearance, every statement is carefully choreographed. What leaks out is rarely accidental, and when it does happen, it's often either swiftly denied or subtly managed. So when an unnamed insider reportedly broke ranks and offered such a direct assertion to someone like Wynne Evans, a man with no formal connection to royal reporting, it was a jarring break from protocol. To understand the weight of this claim, one must appreciate the environment in which such aides operate. Working for the royal family isn't simply a job, it's a lifestyle governed by discretion, tradition, and unwavering loyalty. Aides are expected to function in the background, ensuring that operations run smoothly, that the press is fed the appropriate narrative, and that the internal machinery never spills into public view. For one of these individuals to confide in someone outside that inner circle, particularly with information of this magnitude, suggests either an intentional leak or a moment of personal disillusionment. Why would a palace aide risk such a confession? One possibility is that the individual was no longer bound by confidentiality having already left their post. Another is emotional motivation, perhaps a sense of betrayal, disillusionment, or even guilt over participating in a perceived deception. According to Wynne, the aide didn't sound like they were trying to stir trouble or create drama. Instead, their tone was described as almost reflective matter-of-fact. The phrase modern choice was used, implying the surrogate decision wasn't viewed as scandalous within those private walls, merely unorthodox. And yet, that very unorthodoxy is why it remained buried. Within royal tradition, a pregnancy isn't just a personal journey, it's a matter of public interest, lineage, and national identity. The crown's stability rests on an unbroken chain of bloodlines, each a symbol of continuity. For centuries, the physical birth of a royal child has symbolized legitimacy, carrying with it an almost sacred weight. Any deviation from this, such as using a surrogate, challenges the foundation of that symbolism, even if the law itself does not specifically ban the practice. But laws are not always what define monarchies' optics do. And optics, especially under Queen Elizabeth II's reign, were treated with a severity unmatched in most institutions. The alleged confession that Meghan and Harry used a surrogate for Archie, if true, was not necessarily illegal, immoral, or medically problematic. What made it controversial was that the public had been allowed, some might say encouraged, to believe otherwise. Photos of Meghan with a growing baby bump, interviews that spoke about pregnancy challenges, public engagements designed to showcase a glowing royal mother-to-be, all of these reinforced the idea that she was carrying the child herself. If the truth was something else, then the public narrative had not simply been protected, it had been manufactured. One royal historian remarked in an online column that such a deception, if orchestrated deliberately, would represent one of the most significant manipulations of royal optics in modern history. And more dangerously, it could set a precedent for misleading the public about far more serious constitutional matters. Consider for a moment the legal and symbolic implications. If a child born via surrogate is not genetically connected to the birthing mother, but is biologically connected to the father, it introduces gray areas that monarchy simply doesn't like to acknowledge. In the United Kingdom, succession is determined not by public vote, but by bloodline. While the monarchy has modernized in certain respects, it still leans heavily on inherited legitimacy. A surrogate birth, concealed behind the illusion of a natural pregnancy, doesn't just raise ethical questions, it threatens to rupture public trust in that legitimacy. But there's another layer to this revelation. According to Wynne, the aide claimed, it was never meant to get out, but everyone close to the Sussexes knew. That statement suggests a coordinated inner circle of knowledge and complicity. If true, it raises several troubling questions. Who exactly knew? Did Prince Charles, now king, know at the time? Did Queen Elizabeth II approve of this plan? Were key royal courtiers informed and instructed to maintain the illusion? And if such a strategy existed, who orchestrated it? Many speculators point fingers at the Sussexes' personal communications team during their time at Frogmore Cottage. The couple had reportedly grown frustrated with the lack of media protection they received from the palace and eventually took their press matters into their own hands. This self-managed approach allowed them to selectively engage with the media, approving photo opportunities, issuing press statements directly, and tightly controlling the narrative. It's worth noting that Archie's birth was notably different from previous royal births. There was no immediate hospital photo call. The location of the birth was initially kept secret. It was later revealed, after speculation, that Meghan had delivered at Portland Hospital in London, a private facility far removed from the typical royal maternity settings. Even that revelation came only after investigative journalists pressured the palace for clarity. When Archie was formally introduced to the world, the moment was strange. The couple appeared at Windsor Castle with their newborn wrapped tightly in a white shawl. Meghan looked radiant, but cautious. Harry did most of the talking. There was no royal obstetrician on hand. No delivery team, just a photographer and a small media contingent handpicked by the couple. Critics noted at the time how heavily curated the event felt. Now, in hindsight, those suspicions have resurfaced with greater force. If Meghan was not actually pregnant, and the couple was in the process of introducing a surrogate-born child while preserving the illusion of a natural pregnancy, that brief press event becomes not just curated. It becomes a stage set for an elaborate ruse. Of course, it's essential to examine the possibility that the aide may have been mistaken or misled. Royal households are vast. Staff may be close in proximity, but far from the truth. Rumors fly in closed environments, especially where walls are thick and formal communication is limited. It's possible the aide was speculating or repeating hearsay. Yet when Evan's certainty in repeating the quote and his assertion that it was delivered to him directly casts doubt on that theory. There's also the timing to consider. Why would this claim emerge now? Meghan and Harry are no longer working royals. They live in California, financially independent and free from many of the constraints that once dictated their behavior. If the secret was going to stay buried, this was the perfect climate for it to remain so. The palace has no incentive to resurface controversy. The Sussexes have no reason to provoke scrutiny. So why did this aide speak to Wynne? One theory posits that internal palace figures, especially those loyal to the old order, have grown frustrated with the ongoing efforts by Meghan and Harry to shape their own narrative. From the Oprah interview to the Netflix series and Harry's memoir Spare, the couple has taken control of their story, often at the expense of former colleagues and family members. Perhaps, as a form of quiet resistance, this aide sought to level the playing field by reintroducing the one truth that was never allowed to breathe, the story behind Archie's birth. Another theory suggests timing with King Charles's reign. As the monarchy transitions and modernizes under his leadership, some factions may be hoping to clean the slate, either by surfacing unresolved tensions or exposing past missteps. Whether as a power play or as part of a long-term institutional reset, the release of this information now could be strategic. Still, the most plausible explanation may be the simplest. This aide no longer wanted to carry the secret. In an offhand conversation with Wynne Evans, they let it slip, thinking perhaps it would never be repeated. Or maybe they hoped it would be. Either way, the words are out. There was a surrogate. It was never meant to get out, but everyone close to the Sussexes knew. And now that they're in the public domain, they demand answers. Not just from Meghan and Harry, but from the entire royal system that allowed the truth, if this is indeed the truth, to be so meticulously obscured. The burden now rests on those who were there, the doctors, the handlers, the aides, the security teams. The world may never see documented proof, but the confession from within the palace has reopened a chapter many believed had already been closed. To fully understand the gravity of Wynne Evans' claim and the anonymous palace aide's alleged confession, one must revisit the pivotal year of 2019. Specifically, Meghan Markle's pregnancy timeline leading up to the birth of Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor. That year was marked by intense media scrutiny, relentless tabloid interest, and a carefully constructed public image of a modern royal mother. But within that carefully staged sequence of events were moments that, in retrospect, raise more questions than answers. On October 15, 2018, Kensington Palace officially announced Meghan's pregnancy. The timing of the announcement was significant. It came just as Meghan and Prince Harry embarked on their first major royal tour as a married couple, visiting Australia, Fiji, Tonga, and New Zealand. The trip would last over 2 weeks and involved numerous public engagements, travel by air, and extensive interaction with crowds. At the time, Meghan was said to be around 12 weeks along, and the press marveled at her energy and glow during the tour. She wore a series of elegant outfits, and photos of her cradling what appeared to be a barely noticeable baby bump dominated the front pages. Yet even in those early stages, observers noted how unusually active Meghan remained. She climbed stairs in heels, navigated crowded spaces with ease, and kept a jam-packed schedule. For some, it was a testament to her strength and commitment. For others, it was the first sign that something was amiss. Several bloggers and self-styled analysts began cataloging footage from the tour, tracking how her bump changed in size and shape depending on lighting, camera angles, and posture. In some images, her midsection appeared noticeably pronounced. In others, nearly flat. By late November, public appearances at charity events and royal dinners further stoked speculation. Meghan's clothing choices often emphasized her belly, with her hands frequently placed just below her abdomen in what many interpreted as a subconscious attempt to reinforce the image of pregnancy. But in several videos, her bump appeared to shift unnaturally when she moved or bent forward. In one widely shared clip, Meghan crouched to speak to a child, and viewers pointed out how the bump seemed to fold sharply at the center, an unusual phenomenon for someone in their second trimester. Supporters quickly dismissed the viral videos, citing the natural compression of maternity clothing, angles, or camera distortions. But the skepticism didn't fade. Instead, it spread, quietly at first, through forums, private Facebook groups, and corners of Reddit. Theories began to take shape, suggesting Meghan was wearing a prosthetic bump to simulate pregnancy, while a surrogate carried the actual child. These theories were roundly mocked in mainstream media circles, but the footage was too compelling for some to ignore. Into January 2019, Meghan made increasingly frequent public appearances. On January 10th, she visited SmartWorks, one of her newly announced royal patronages. Wearing a figure-hugging dress, she showcased a visibly round bump. Yet video footage from the day showed a curious detail. While walking past a group of photographers, she abruptly switched the hand she used to cradle her bump and adjusted her dress in a way that appeared more focused on positioning a prop than comforting a growing child. That same month, she made a surprise appearance at the National Theatre. Her outfit, a cream dress with a structured blazer, again drew attention to her belly. Critics pointed to how the bump seemed unusually firm and high for someone reportedly in her 7th month. Again, these observations were brushed aside by most royal correspondents, but whispers persisted. On February 20th, 2019, Meghan held her now infamous baby shower in New York City. The event, estimated to cost over $200,000, was hosted at the Markle Hotel and attended by a list of elite celebrities including Serena Williams and Amal Clooney. Meghan was photographed entering and exiting the hotel in various outfits, each showing a differently sized bump. In one set of photos taken just hours apart, her bump appeared dramatically larger in the evening compared to that morning. The media's tone was celebratory. American outlets framed the baby shower as a touching homage to Meghan's roots. British tabloids were more critical, attacking the cost and lavishness of the event. But online investigators focused on something else entirely: the inconsistency in her bump size and her body language. Meghan moved swiftly, bending, turning, and carrying bags with ease. For a woman in her 8th month, her agility surprised many. Even casual observers began asking questions. By March, Meghan's due date was reportedly fast approaching. Yet no specific date had been confirmed publicly. In fact, during an appearance on March 11th at Canada House in London for Commonwealth Day, Meghan told a woman in the crowd that she was due end of April, early May. The ambiguity struck some as odd. Royal watchers pointed out that Kate Middleton and other royal women before her had typically offered more specific windows. That day, Meghan wore a green dress with black coat, and again, her bump size became a topic of discussion. Video clips revealed her walking swiftly, climbing stairs unaided, and again touching or adjusting the bump repeatedly. In one moment, her hand slipped, and the bump seemed to jiggle unusually, as though not firmly connected to her body. On March 19th, during a panel for International Women's Day, Meghan sat for a lengthy discussion. She was radiant, confident, and clearly leading the conversation. But her sitting posture, leaning forward for most of the event, crossing and uncrossing her legs comfortably, raised eyebrows. Most women in their 9th month of pregnancy report discomfort when sitting for extended periods, particularly in formal attire. Meghan, by contrast, seemed completely unaffected. April brought even more confusion. By mid-month, rumors swirled that Meghan had already given birth. The palace issued no official statement. Speculation surged, and then abruptly on May 6, 2019, the palace confirmed that Meghan had gone into labor that morning and given birth to a healthy baby boy at 5:26 a.m. But something about the timeline felt strange. The baby was reportedly born at Portland Hospital in London, yet there were no photos of Meghan arriving or leaving. Even stranger, Prince Harry addressed the press just hours later, speaking about how amazing Meghan had been and how every father says his child is absolutely amazing, but he fumbled several basic questions, such as the baby's name and where exactly Meghan had given birth. 2 days later, on May 8th, the world saw Archie for the first time. In a brief, heavily controlled photo call at Windsor Castle, Meghan and Harry appeared beaming with pride. But the circumstances again felt unusually guarded. Meghan, wearing a white trench-style dress, held Archie in her arms while Prince Harry looked on lovingly. But the media noticed what wasn't there. No members of the delivery team, no royal medical officials, no hospital background. And perhaps most telling, no visible signs that Meghan had recently given birth. Her posture was upright, her stomach notably flat, and she looked remarkably refreshed. This detail wasn't lost on the public. In contrast, Both Kate Middleton and Princess Diana had faced cameras just hours after giving birth, looking visibly tired, their figures still bearing the marks of labor. Meghan's appearance, by contrast, seemed airbrushed by reality. The entire event was over in minutes. No follow-up interviews. No behind-the-scenes footage. The press was ushered out swiftly. As months passed, questions were raised about Archie's christening as well. Held in July 2019 at a private chapel in Windsor Castle, the ceremony was closed to the press, with only 2 photographs released. One was a family portrait in a sitting room, and the other a black and white image of Meghan and Harry holding Archie in the shadows. Royalists noted that neither photo provided a clear or detailed look at the child. While it's not unusual for royals to seek privacy for personal events, the near-total blackout surrounding Archie's early life fueled further speculation. Why the secrecy? Why the absence of traditional protocols? These questions remained largely unanswered until when Evans reignited the conversation. When he quoted the palace aide who said there was a surrogate, it cast a harsh light on every ambiguous moment in Meghan's pregnancy timeline. The inconsistencies, the unusual body language, the rapidly shifting bump sizes, the lack of hospital imagery, each became, in the public's mind, another piece of a hidden puzzle. Could it all be explained by clever clothing, camera angles, and a desire for privacy? Perhaps. But could it also point toward a deliberately hidden surrogacy arrangement? One protected by a wall of silence, orchestrated by a tight-knit team, and executed with precision? The truth, as it so often is in royal affairs, remains hidden. But 2019, when viewed through the lens of Wynne's revelation, feels less like a joyous royal pregnancy and more like a carefully constructed performance. And if that's the case, the audience may now be seeing behind the curtain for the first time. The British royal family has long operated as a hybrid between a ceremonial monarchy and a tightly run public relations machine. From Queen Elizabeth II's earliest televised broadcasts to Prince William and Kate Middleton's carefully curated social media profiles, the monarchy has evolved into one of the world's most image-conscious institutions. Every ribbon cutting, every balcony wave, every baby christening is carefully packaged, timed, and controlled. So when it came to Meghan Markle's pregnancy in 2019, and particularly the birth of Archie, the inner workings of that machinery took on a new level of intensity and secrecy. The decision by Meghan and Harry to deviate from traditional royal birth protocols was not simply a personal preference. It marked a seismic shift in how royal communications would operate under their influence. The most glaring sign of this shift was the media blackout that surrounded Archie's birth. Unlike previous royal births, where photographers camped for days outside hospitals and doctors gave official statements, the Sussexes opted for near-total silence. There was no hospital door appearance, no announced due date, not even a clear indication of whether Meghan was still pregnant in her final weeks. To longtime royal correspondents, this was more than unusual, it was unprecedented. Reporters had covered the births of Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis with a level of access that, while still limited, allowed for transparency. Medical teams gave updates, press received confirmations in real time, and the public felt included in what was presented as a national celebration. But Archie's birth broke from this rhythm entirely. On May 6, 2019, the palace issued a curt, vague statement. Meghan had gone into labor that morning and had given birth to a baby boy at 5:26 a.m. However, only hours later, it was revealed that the baby had already been born earlier and that the couple had delayed the announcement to control the narrative. This alone marked a breach of protocol. For the British public, accustomed to real-time information from the palace, this revelation suggested deliberate obfuscation. Why delay the news? What was happening behind closed doors? The media, already irked by limited access, grew suspicious. Royal reporters voiced frustration on air and in print. Some speculated that the palace's press office had been sidelined entirely, with Meghan and Harry operating their own messaging independently. Indeed, the Sussexes had already shown a desire to break from traditional royal communication. Their Instagram account, @SussexRoyal, had begun issuing official updates that bypassed palace channels entirely. Carefully curated photos, vague captions, and selective engagement with media outlets all pointed to a new, personalized PR strategy. When questioned about the lack of transparency surrounding the birth, the palace remained cryptic. A statement was issued, confirming that the couple had chosen to celebrate privately as a family. There were no interviews with medical staff, no press briefings from royal physicians, and no indication of the hospital's location until much later, when it was quietly revealed that Meghan had given birth at the Portland Hospital in London. Even that piece of information was buried beneath layers of press silence. Traditionally, royal births include a signed bulletin by the attending doctors, displayed at the gates of Buckingham Palace. For Archie, this too was skipped. Instead, a generic framed announcement was posted, without names or signatures, leaving many to question if standard medical documentation even existed. This deviation further fueled speculation that Meghan had not given birth herself, and that the absence of formal documentation was a cover for an unconventional birth arrangement, possibly involving a surrogate. What made matters worse was the inconsistency in the messaging. On one hand, the couple expressed a desire for privacy. On the other, they released heavily edited photos on their own terms, engaged in public appearances, and spoke about motherhood in interviews. This selective transparency baffled the press and public alike. If privacy was truly the goal, why not retreat entirely? Why offer glimpses if not to fuel a particular narrative? The royal family has always walked a fine line between tradition and adaptability. But Meghan and Harry's media strategy felt less like adaptation and more like rebellion. From the outside, it seemed they were attempting to redefine how royalty interacted with the public, not through shared ceremonies and trusted news agencies, but through filtered digital images and personal anecdotes. Critics labeled it disingenuous. Supporters called it empowering. But everyone agreed on one thing: the old system was no longer in control. This shift wasn't just philosophical. It had real consequences. Members of the Royal Rota, a group of accredited journalists traditionally granted privileged access to royal events, were increasingly kept in the dark. Invitations were no longer extended. Briefings were held without notice. Embargoed information was broken or withheld. Tensions rose as journalists who had spent decades covering royal affairs were suddenly cut out of the loop. Several prominent royal correspondents, including Camilla Tominey and Roya Nika, wrote columns criticizing the Sussexes' approach. They argued that while the couple's desire for autonomy was understandable, their hostility toward the press created an environment of mistrust and speculation. Instead of transparency, the vacuum gave rise to conspiracy theories. And nowhere was this more evident than in the online discourse surrounding Archie's birth. With no hospital images, no medical confirmations, and no eyewitness accounts, the internet became a breeding ground for alternative narratives. Users compiled video clips of Meghan's pregnancy. They dissected her posture, her outfits, even her hand placement. Some of these investigations were unhinged. Others, unsettlingly thorough. Without official information, everything became fair game. The media blackout, designed to protect privacy, had the opposite effect. It created a hunger for answers that only speculation could satisfy. In hindsight, the handling of Archie's birth was a case study in how secrecy, even when well-intentioned, can backfire in the digital age. The palace's failure to provide clarity only amplified the controversy. Rather than controlling the story, the lack of engagement handed control to the internet. One unnamed former press officer at Kensington Palace later admitted to a British magazine that the Sussexes' refusal to follow communication protocol was exhausting. The team was reportedly often blindsided by announcements, learning of them through social media rather than internal channels. The same source described the birth rollout as a masterclass in how not to manage a royal event. They claimed that several staff members pleaded for a more transparent approach, warning that the secrecy would invite public backlash. Their concerns were allegedly dismissed. Meanwhile, the palace remained largely silent on the matter. Queen Elizabeth, known for her never complain, never explain approach, offered no comment. Prince Charles continued with his duties. Prince William and Kate maintained their usual rhythm, never acknowledging the swirling rumors. The silence, again, became its own form of communication, one that signaled either compliance, complicity, or calculated detachment. Yet even amidst the blackout, there were subtle signs that all was not as it appeared. When Harry spoke to the press just after Archie's birth, his language was strangely vague. He beamed with pride, certainly, but avoided details. When asked where Meghan had given birth, he dodged the question. When asked how labor had gone, he offered general praise but no specifics. It was, for a new father, oddly imprecise. Over time, this pattern of vague responses and carefully choreographed appearances came to define the Sussexes' media interactions. The more they said, the less it revealed. Their statements were layered with platitudes, their interviews steeped in emotion but devoid of concrete facts. And every time they withheld a detail, the public filled the gap with speculation. The few interviews Meghan gave after Archie's birth only deepened the mystery. In a conversation with journalist Tom Bradby during the couple's South Africa tour, she spoke emotionally about the pressures of motherhood and being under a microscope. But even in this vulnerable moment, she avoided discussing the birth directly. No anecdotes from the delivery room. No stories of late-night feedings or medical surprises. Just general statements about stress and privacy. It was an omission that did not go unnoticed. When the couple eventually stepped down from their roles as senior royals in 2020, they cited media intrusion as one of their primary reasons. But by then, the damage had been done. The way Archie's birth was handled left an indelible mark on public perception. It represented, for many, a turning point in how the royals communicated with the world and how the public chose to respond. In the wake of Wynne Evans' claim and the palace aide's alleged confession, the media blackout takes on new significance. It no longer appears as a simple act of privacy. It now seems like a calculated strategy to suppress a truth too controversial for public consumption. If the decision to use a surrogate was real, then the blackout wasn't merely protective, it was preemptive. A barrier designed not just to shield Archie from attention, but to hide the very nature of his birth. The question is no longer just about why the Sussexes wanted privacy. The question is what, exactly, they were hiding. The idea of surrogacy is not new. In the modern world, it has become an increasingly common reproductive solution, especially among those who face medical complications, fertility issues, or personal choices that lead them to pursue alternative pathways to parenthood. Celebrities, wealthy elites, and everyday couples alike have embraced surrogacy, some openly, others more discreetly. Yet within the walls of Britain's most enduring institution, the monarchy, surrogacy remains something unspoken. Not forbidden by law, but virtually absent from the realm of accepted royal behavior. And therein lies the problem. When Wynne Evans claimed on national television that a former palace aide had confided in him that Meghan Markle did not carry Archie herself, but used a surrogate, and that everyone close to the Sussexes knew. It wasn't simply shocking because it revealed a private decision. It was shocking because it broke an unspoken royal code, one steeped in centuries of tradition, bloodlines, and image preservation. If true, Meghan's choice would have gone against a long-standing, though unofficial, royal taboo. To understand the magnitude of such a breach, one must first understand what surrogacy represents within royal tradition, or rather, what it doesn't represent. The monarchy is built on the idea of visible lineage. The visual journey of a royal child, from conception through birth and into public life, is tightly bound to the concept of legitimacy. It's about more than family. It's about succession, duty, and blood. Throughout history, royal births have been not only documented but witnessed. In earlier centuries, royal women were often required to give birth in front of witnesses, sometimes even members of court, to prevent any accusations of baby swapping or illegitimacy. Though barbaric by modern standards, this practice underscores how deeply the monarchy has always tied childbirth to public accountability. In modern times, while medical professionals and confidentiality agreements have replaced courtiers and open rooms, the need for transparency remains strong. Kate Middleton, for example, gave birth in the Lindo wing of St. Mary's Hospital in London under the watch of royal doctors. She was photographed hours after delivery, standing on the hospital steps with Prince William and each of her 3 children. These moments were both deeply personal and constitutionally symbolic. They confirmed that the future heirs to the throne were born of her body, under royal supervision, in line with tradition. Surrogacy, on the other hand, introduces complexity. Legally, a surrogate mother is not automatically recognized as the child's parent in UK law. Parental rights must be transferred through legal documentation, typically after birth. The process is carefully regulated, but it lacks the ceremonial and symbolic clarity that the monarchy relies on. Moreover, public understanding of surrogacy is still evolving. While acceptance has grown significantly, particularly in celebrity culture, for many traditionalists, especially older royalists, it remains a controversial concept. This is particularly true within the British aristocracy, where bloodline and heritage are paramount. Titles, lands, and social standing often depend on direct biological descent. While surrogacy does not inherently disrupt lineage if biological material from both parents is used, The secrecy surrounding the process invites speculation, doubt, and, for some, the perception of illegitimacy. That's not a legal judgment, it's a cultural one. And culture matters deeply in the House of Windsor. For Meghan Markle, a woman already fighting public and private battles over acceptance, tradition, and scrutiny, the notion of going through surrogacy while presenting a conventional pregnancy to the world would have been an explosive decision. If it was done, it may have been motivated not by vanity or deception, but by an awareness of the crushing expectations placed on her. Meghan entered the royal family as a modern woman, divorced, biracial, American, and outspoken. Each of these attributes challenged the monarchy's archaic image in its own way. While some embraced the change, others viewed her as a threat to the institution's carefully curated continuity. Add to this a hypothetical surrogacy, and it becomes easier to understand why, if such a decision had been made, it might have been shielded from public view. In many progressive circles, surrogacy is considered a personal medical choice, a pragmatic response to medical realities or lifestyle needs. But in the royal family, there is no such thing as a purely private decision. Every action has implications for the crown, and by extension, for national identity. Consider the implications had the palace publicly acknowledged a surrogate birth. The narrative would have shifted dramatically. It would have prompted questions from constitutional scholars, politicians, and the Church of England. Would the child's succession rights be impacted? Would the absence of a public delivery raise doubts about the child's parentage? Would the surrogate need to be vetted or identified? How would that affect the monarchy's public trust? None of these questions have easy answers. And that's precisely why, if when Evan's claim is true, the palace and the Sussexes alike may have chosen silence. The potential fallout, constitutional, cultural, and emotional, would have been enormous. There is, of course, precedent for secrecy around royal births. In the past, the royal family has delayed announcements, misdirected media, and kept details sparse. Queen Elizabeth herself was born via caesarean section at a private home, attended by a royal doctor and midwife, but little was shared publicly. Yet even in those cases, the presumption of natural, maternal delivery was never questioned. What makes Meghan's case different is the level of public visibility and skepticism surrounding her pregnancy. Because of her celebrity background and the intense media attention she faced, her body became a focal point for criticism and speculation. Every public appearance during her pregnancy was dissected, every outfit analyzed. And when inconsistencies began to surface, folding bumps, shifting sizes, unnatural postures, the public didn't forget. They archived. This brings us back to the role of surrogacy in the broader conversation. The topic has evolved significantly in public discourse over the last 2 decades. In Hollywood and elite circles, it is often embraced as a lifestyle choice. Celebrities like Kim Kardashian, Tyra Banks, Nicole Kidman, and Sarah Jessica Parker have openly spoken about using surrogates. Their openness has helped normalize the practice and reduce stigma. But even in these progressive narratives, there is still a measure of sensitivity, especially when public images must be maintained. If Meghan did use a surrogate, and if that decision was kept secret, it may have been influenced by this very dynamic. As a public figure stepping into a royal role, she may have felt pressure to adhere to expectations of what a royal mother should look like. The palace, concerned with optics, may have supported a plan to present a traditional pregnancy to the public. Whether that presentation was carefully managed or allowed to grow organically from subtle misdirections is a matter of debate. And this brings up ethical questions. Is it wrong to use a surrogate and not disclose it publicly? In private life, absolutely not. Surrogacy is a deeply personal matter. But the royals do not live private lives. They live symbolic ones. When a member of the royal family undergoes a major life event, marriage, childbirth, even illness, it is not just a family affair. It is a matter of national interest. They are paid by the taxpayer. Their legitimacy is bound up with history. Their children are future heads of state. In such a framework, secrecy can be interpreted not as privacy, but as deception. Still, there's an argument to be made in defense of discretion. Meghan was already facing unparalleled levels of scrutiny, racism, and tabloid hostility. To disclose a surrogacy, particularly in the early years of her royal life, may have exposed her to even greater abuse. People might have accused her of vanity, weakness, or unfitness. They may have used the surrogate narrative to question Archie's legitimacy. Perhaps the palace itself feared that open acknowledgement of such a modern choice would fracture public support. In this light, if the decision was made to protect Meghan and the child from harm, then the strategy, however controversial, may have come from a place of concern. But the longer the truth was buried, the more damaging it became. Once the public suspects they've been misled, trust erodes quickly. And the revelation, when it inevitably comes, becomes more scandalous than it ever would have been in real time. Moreover, the revelation, whether factual or not, now has momentum. When Evan's statement was not a fringe whisper, it was national news. The alleged AIDS quote, "There was a surrogate." It was never meant to get out, invites inquiry. And inquiry invites consequence. If surrogacy was used, and if the palace worked to conceal it, then we are witnessing a breakdown in transparency between the monarchy and its people. If the story is untrue, then someone within or close to the royal structure fabricated one of the most inflammatory claims possible. Either scenario is deeply damaging. The royal family has always struggled to balance tradition with modernization. Diana brought emotional honesty. Kate has brought stability. Meghan brought disruption, some would say necessary disruption. But if surrogacy is the secret at the heart of Meghan and Harry's departure, then the monarchy's unwillingness to adapt may be part of its own undoing. The question moving forward is not simply whether Meghan used a surrogate. It is whether the monarchy can survive in an age where secrets are nearly impossible to keep, and where the public demands authenticity over image. One of the defining features of Meghan Markle's entrance into the royal family was her clear desire to shape and control her own narrative. From the beginning, Meghan exhibited a meticulous approach to public image: what she wore, how she spoke, which charities she supported, and how she was portrayed in the media. Unlike previous royal spouses, she did not appear content to allow the palace communications office to handle her story. She wanted control, and this desire, while understandable, often clashed with the traditional operations of the royal institution. In the case of Archie's birth, and the persistent rumors that she used a surrogate, this need for control may have fueled one of the most complex and tightly managed personal media strategies in recent royal history. Meghan's background in Hollywood played a significant role in how she approached her public image. As an actress, she understood the power of presentation. She had spent years curating her own lifestyle blog, The Tig, where she shared personal anecdotes, fashion advice, and insights into her world. She knew how to create an aesthetic, control messaging, and present a version of herself that felt relatable yet aspirational. This background gave her an edge when she became Duchess of Sussex, but it also created tension with a palace machinery that was accustomed to central command. From the outset of her royal life, Meghan sought to break norms. While Prince William and Kate Middleton followed a formula of traditional engagement and deferential tone, Meghan came in with a direct, American confidence. She often spoke in interviews with a level of emotional candor rarely seen in royal circles. But that same openness did not extend to every part of her life. Certain aspects, particularly her pregnancy with Archie, were kept almost entirely out of public reach. This divide created confusion. On the one hand, Meghan presented herself as a modern, transparent figure willing to talk about identity, motherhood, and trauma. On the other, she erected a wall around specific elements of her life, particularly her son's arrival. While there is no obligation for any woman, royal or otherwise, to expose the details of her reproductive journey, in the context of royal tradition and public funding, Meghan's approach stood in stark contrast to her predecessors. The contradictions were glaring. When Meghan appeared at high-profile public events in 2019, she was glowing, poised, and often placed her hands on her visible baby bump, a gesture many interpreted as both affectionate and performative. Yet there was never confirmation from royal doctors. No official due date was released. No media were informed about her admission to hospital. When Archie was born, the delay in announcement further muddied the waters. These details, perhaps negligible in a private citizen's life, took on tremendous meaning within the structure of the monarchy. Meghan's desire to retain control became even more evident in how the couple handled Archie's early appearances. They chose a heavily restricted christening, with only selected photographs released. There were no press pools, no footage of guests arriving, no detailed statement about the event. The photographs themselves were heavily curated, stylized, dimly lit, and artfully arranged to reveal very little. Even Archie's godparents were kept secret, breaking with centuries of royal tradition. Observers began to wonder, was this an attempt to shield Archie from the intense public spotlight? Or was it part of a broader effort to prevent certain truths from being exposed? When Evan's claim, citing a palace aide who alleged that Meghan used a surrogate, recast these decisions in a more strategic light. If there had been a surrogate, then every moment of Meghan appearing pregnant would have been constructed not just to protect privacy, but to maintain a carefully staged illusion. The use of tailored maternity wear, the timing of public appearances, and the controlled photography would all take on new meaning as tools to reinforce a narrative that was never fully grounded in reality. This level of image management aligns with Meghan's approach throughout her time as a working royal. From selecting which charities to support to negotiating media coverage, she demonstrated a relentless focus on presentation. When she felt the palace's communications team failed to protect her, she and Harry broke away and began issuing their own statements. Their Instagram account became the central hub for all updates. Press releases came directly from their office, not the palace. In essence, they formed a breakaway brand within the royal family. And it was a brand built on emotion, inspiration, and curated authenticity. But curated authenticity is a double-edged sword. The moment the public begins to suspect that the transparency is only skin-deep, trust evaporates. And that is what appeared to happen with Meghan. Her openness about feeling vulnerable, isolated, and unsupported as a new royal mother struck many as genuine. Yet her refusal to allow traditional press access, and her evasiveness around fundamental details of her son's birth, introduced suspicion. The Oprah Winfrey interview in 2021 only added to this dynamic. Meghan spoke at length about her mental health struggles, her feelings of alienation, and the racism she allegedly endured within the palace. It was a bombshell interview, filled with personal truths. But when it came to specific timelines or the birth of Archie, Meghan remained vague. She spoke passionately about being a mother and the importance of protecting her children, but avoided any direct references to labor, delivery, or the challenges of pregnancy. For viewers already questioning her narrative, the omission stood out. At no point did Meghan explicitly deny surrogacy rumors, but nor did she acknowledge them. This absence of clarity became fertile ground for speculation. If she had nothing to hide, why not say so? If the stories were false, why not issue a statement? For someone so committed to controlling her image, her silence on this particular issue was deafening. Some defenders argue that Meghan's decisions were rooted in trauma, that she was hounded by the press, betrayed by her father, and let down by the palace. In this view, her desire to control her narrative was not manipulation but survival. She was protecting herself and her family from a hostile world. Others argue the opposite. That Meghan's obsession with image management became so intense that it eroded the very trust she sought to build. That her refusal to allow even minimal transparency bred skepticism, not sympathy. This obsession also extended into the couple's departure from royal life. When Harry and Meghan stepped back from their roles in 2020, they didn't fade into quiet obscurity. They launched a media empire, signing deals with Netflix, Spotify, and publishers. Their story became a product, their experiences a brand. They told the world they wanted privacy, but also demanded a global stage to share their version of events. Within this framework, controlling the narrative around Archie's birth would have been critical. Any revelation of surrogacy, whether true or false, could undermine the emotional foundation of their